I don't think I've got a single thing to say that hasn't already been said this afternoon, so this is your opportunity for a bit of mindfulness. Concentrate on the breath. So I'm a psychiatrist, which means I studied medicine at university and I graduated in 2001. I worked as an intern and a junior doctor in the hospitals before training in psychiatry, which took about 5 years. I qualified as a psychiatrist in 2009 and specialised in child and adolescent psychiatry. Through all these career stages, over 20 years, I worked for Queensland Health. And I worked for Queensland Health for 9 years as a senior staff specialist until I was stood down in April 2023. And I remained suspended 2.5 years later. So why am I here today? Instead of being at the hospital treating patients, why am I banned from setting foot in that hospital? Essentially, it's because I was a domino in a line that didn't fall, despite pressure to do so. And I don't know why I stayed standing, because I like a good trend and I like to be part of the group. I'm a team player at work. And just like everyone else, I really don't like being banished. But I will be damned if I will see children being harmed and not speak up about it. And I will be damned if I give false information to traumatised children that changing their body to resemble the opposite sex will help them to feel better. I'll not pretend that these gender interventions that cause infertility, a lack of sexual function and long-term physical health problems are needed for a child to express their authentic self. These gender interventions are grievous bodily harm. They cause permanent injuries, permanent disfigurement. So, you can report me to APRA and you can send me another show cause notice. I was not put on this earth to participate in harming children, and so my message to the Queensland Children's Hospital is, you can't make me. But it should never have come all the way down to me to be the one to resist. Normal medical quality and safety processes should have caught this quackery early, well before it came to Australia. No hospital in Australia should have been able to set up a gender service providing interventions underpinned by such poor quality evidence and causing such serious harms. I want to impress on you just how unprecedented this situation is, and I think this scandal will be studied for decades to come. When I first started raising concerns about the harms of gender interventions, people comforted me and they said it would be like the fable of the Emperor's New Clothes, in that pointing out the harms and the falsity of people being able to change sex would cause a rapid correction of the problem. However, in that fable, there wasn't a powerful, well-funded industry and political movement intimidating and cajoling people into continuing to believe that the Emperor was not naked. This scandal has demonstrated that fear of losing their employment and registration is enough to make doctors look away and keep quiet. Gender medicine, as we've heard, started for children in the early 2000s with very poorly conducted research in Amsterdam, where there was a switching of the male and female versions of the gender dysphoria rating scale to achieve the study's main finding of reduced gender dysphoria. Puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones have never been subject to high-quality scientific studies, but nonetheless they've been rolled out across the Western world by activists and activist clinicians. In Australia, the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne visited the now shut-down Tavistock Gender Identity Development Service in the UK to learn about their model, then brought the affirmation model back to Australia, back to Melbourne, and then seeded it around Australia. And a group of gender activists from the Children's Hospital in Melbourne generated a document that explained how they were delivering these interventions and grandiosely called it the Australian Standards of Care. At the time, the medical profession was very trusting of this small group of gender clinicians holding bizarre ideas. From 2017 onwards, there was a gender clinic set up in the Queensland Children's Hospital, and over subsequent years I saw an increasing number of children and adolescents claiming to be trans. The numbers skyrocketed during COVID. These children often had histories of trauma. They had mental health problems and developmental disorders like autism. There were lonely kids that had spent too much time online, anxious kids who had friends who were transitioning and were scared of being on the outer. There were kids who had become involved in gender ideology as a political movement concerned about a dominant cis heteronormative paradigm which they thought was harming all marginalised peoples. We've always known that adolescence is a time of exploration and identity formation, and that any issues in childhood or adolescence can improve with maturity. So it was very confusing to me to see the gender clinic putting adolescents with various complex issues on interventions that have lifelong harms. I first raised my concerns in writing in the hospital in 2019. I was working in the child mental health unit at the time, and a girl was admitted with suicidal ideation. She'd suffered the sudden death of a parent and was the youngest with a lot of elder siblings. It was clear that she was grieving and feeling really miserable and isolated and really struggling to find her place in the world. And she told me that she was really a gay man. She was seen by the gender clinic. When I looked at the notes from the gender clinic, I saw that she had said very little during her appointment. Nonetheless, she was started on puberty blockers from that first appointment. At that time, I hadn't looked into the research enough, so I was placated in my concerns by the gender clinic telling me that they knew how to identify those children who would have an enduring trans identity, and they said she was one of them. It took me a couple of years to figure out that this is absolutely untrue. There is no way to predict if a child will persist in their gender distress. Studies from before the affirmation model clearly show that the vast majority of children won't persist in their distress. When you start looking at the research in this area, it's disturbing. The people working in gender clinics internationally are activists, and they conduct dodgy research to justify transitioning children. There are so many studies that falsely claim to have proven that there are benefits. The studies have issues like small number of subjects, short follow-up timeframes, high dropout rates, outcome measures that aren't validated, and the reporting of marginal results as highly positive. If one small subscale on an outcome measure improves by a couple of points after a couple of months, they'll tell you that the interventions are improving the patient's mental health. And that is why all the well-conducted systematic reviews of the worldwide research literature will tell you that there's insufficient evidence of benefit, but there's serious harms. As the US Health and Human Services report earlier this year correctly concluded, the affirmation approach has an unfavourable risk-benefit profile. So from 2017 through to 2022, I saw the gradual intrusion of more and more gender ideology at the hospital. We've been given regular education sessions about gender and pronouns. We were told false information that these interventions were life-saving, and if we raised concerns, they said that trans kids would die from suicide. We've been surrounded by a ridiculous amount of LGBTIQA+ signage and transgender progress flags, and an increasing number of staff were wearing rainbow lanyards and badges saying ally or their pronouns. We were being expected to introduce ourselves to every patient by saying, "My name is Jillian, my pronouns are she, her, what are yours?" We're having clinical case discussions where we were pretending the child patient was the opposite sex, and it was considered transphobic if you wanted to try and assist the child to feel comfortable in their own body. The only treatment plan allowed was affirmation and referral to the gender clinic. I was seeing troubled, confused and traumatised children being put onto puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, and it was distressing. So things escalated for me when I said I wouldn't use the preferred pronouns of children. In response, the hospital executive issued me with a lawful direction. It said I had to always use the preferred pronouns of children, always take an affirming approach, and always refer gender questioning children to the gender clinic. So that lawful direction was issued in January 2023, and then subsequently in April 2023, I was removed from clinical duties after a false complaint from a troubled adolescent. And I've never been in trouble at work before all this, but over the last 3 years, I've really discovered how the whole disciplinary process works. It's been an interesting learning curve. And I do wonder if I've got the record for the most number of show cause notices to an employee. I've had 4. Apart from the initial complaint, all the other allegations relate to me speaking publicly against gender-affirming interventions for children, because the hospital believes that me raising my concerns publicly breaches the code of conduct. But the purpose of the Public Service Code of Conduct is to ensure that public service acts with integrity, accountability and impartiality. It was never designed to be used by hospitals to force doctors to keep quiet about a scandal. And what this means is that the only doctors who can speak safely and publicly about these gender interventions are those that are aligned with the hospital's agenda to transition children. This suppresses debate and tricks the public into thinking that there is a medical consensus supporting gender interventions. The doctors being regarded as experts become the handful of doctors working in the gender clinic. And when you're stood down, you have to self-report to APRA and provide them with the allegations against you. So that was the first of many Office of the Health Ombudsman and APRA complaints related to the gender issue. When you're in my situation, complaints to APRA and other bodies get used as a way to keep you quiet. And I've learned that the systems that were put in place to ensure the safety of health services, they're meant to be independent, but they don't function to actually protect patients if the health interventions are in line with government policy. For example, I reported my concerns about the harms to patients from the gender affirming model at the hospital to the Office of the Health Ombudsman, but they dismissed my concerns as unfounded because the hospital provided false information saying that the interventions have evidence of benefit. In addition, 3 times I followed the hospital's public interest disclosure process to raise my concerns, but each time the hospital said the harms weren't serious or specific enough to reach the threshold for it to be deemed a public interest disclosure. Letters to the Health Minister, Director General and Chief Medical Officer about my concerns were all dismissed. So my experiences over the last few years have suggested to me that gender interventions are being championed by political activists as a way to change society. A political movement has been formed because misguided politicians and the public have been encouraged and intimidated into believing that harmful gender interventions are kind for children. That gender interventions are a political issue disconnected from any basis in healthcare has become clearer over time as we've seen all the concerning findings of the multiple systematic reviews fail to stop these interventions from being promoted and provided. There's been no backing away from the gender affirming model in any state of Australia where there's a left-wing government. Another element of one element of gender affirming care that indicates its political basis is the prominence of the transgender pride flags and other visual symbols in the workplace. These serve to publicly signal allegiance to the belief that people can change sex. These visual symbols create an intimidating workplace environment and incredible social pressure upon those staff who don't agree. Gender affirming care also differs from other mental health conditions in requiring clinicians to adopt new language such as sex assigned at birth, gender identities, cisgender, etc. The use of the language signals a clinician's allegiance to the political ideas and once again places other clinicians under social pressure to conform. As I discovered, employees have a well-grounded fear of getting fired if they don't use it. In clinical interactions, the special language interferes with the relationship with the child's family as it signals that the clinician is not willing to explore the child's relationship to their biological sex. In this way, as a clinician functioning as an expert, it imposes the political agenda onto parents. And I am constantly contacted by desperate parents who are trying to find a non-affirming doctor or therapist for their child. A key mechanism by which psychiatry became politicised on this issue was through the political activist organisations masquerading as health organisations. The Australian Professional Association for Trans Health, AUSPATH, describes itself as a national peak body. However, it considers lived experience as equal to scientific knowledge and admits people with lived experience as full members. The organisation only accepts people who support their view. People like me can't join. It doesn't include the lived experience of detransitioners or distressed parents watching their child being medicalised. And so political activists in AUSPATH have falsely represented themselves as health experts working within a health advocacy organisation. State government health services then claim that the health expertise of AusPath guides their workplace clinical policies. In 2024, the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, AHPRA, signed up to the Rainbow Tick scheme. This is really concerning for health practitioners like me who disagree with gender interventions. The Rainbow Tick scheme is a La Trobe University research team wholly funded by the Victorian government, and the scheme functions to monitor member organisations' compliance with requirements of the scheme. For example, organisations are required to ensure that systems and staff appropriately recognise a person's identity through preferred name and pronoun use. Therefore, AHPRA is seeking to ensure health clinicians comply with goals that have been established by university academics who are aligned with the government's political agenda to champion harmful gender interventions. And gender interventions have been marketed as a highly sophisticated health treatment, which worked to put it outside the realm of public debate. Its supposed basis in health expertise functioned to set aside the reasonable reservations held by members of the general public based on their own experience of childhood and adolescence as a period of immaturity and experimentation with identity. I think it was the enigma of psychiatry that's provided a cover to make it seem normal to transition children. And none of this could have happened without the small group of gender activist clinicians who subscribe to bizarre, false ideas that there are more than two sexes, that a child can be born in the wrong body, and that people can change sex. Gender clinics attract a strange group of clinicians who appear to have personal reasons or political goals, causing them to want to work in the gender clinic. In contrast to interventions in other areas of child psychiatry, gender interventions are marketed as life-saving and as significantly improving health and well-being, and the heroic nature of this sales pitch risks attracting clinicians who are seeking personal validation from obtaining entirely positive patient outcomes. The gender clinic uses a lot of brightly coloured visual symbols to convey to the child and the parent that everyone must be enthusiastic about the prospect of changing the body to look like the opposite sex. So this atmosphere is quite emotionally controlling and designed to signal to everyone that they're not allowed to have any doubts or concerns. Unfortunately, these days, people aren't so alert to quackery. With the scientific progress of medicine, the general public lost awareness of the phenomenon of doctors providing discredited interventions for their own personal or professional reasons. We all forgot about the issue of the snake oil salesman. But when members of the general public come to understand what has been done to children, they become alarmed and angry. The existence of a powerful and well-funded political lobby championing these interventions means that we require decisive political measures by politicians to stop the harm. In my opinion, state-sanctioned harm to children has a nasty stench that will permanently attach to any politician who has endorsed the gender clinics. So I encourage politicians to get it on the record as soon as possible that they do not support the transitioning of children. Thank you.